accomplished guest speakers. And we're truly lucky that one of them is with us today to deliver the keynote address. I know that our on-site and online participants are eager to hear from him, so without further ado, let us get to know our keynote speaker in this video.
Our keynote speaker specializes in philosophy, technology, and society. He is a research professor at the Center for Science, Technology, and Society, Department of Philosophy, Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. He is a research professor and fellow in Convergence and 3E, Energy, Economy, Environment at the Asia Institute in Tokyo. He is also a former research professor at Sungkyunkwan University in Korea, the Advanced Institute for Nanotechnology and Sukmyung Women's University in South Korea. He is a researcher at the University of Virginia College of Medicine, USA. He is a board member of the Korea Industry and Technology Times. He currently serves as advisor to the Chonburi Province Department of Education on comprehensive education, Finland's model at the administrative level and science and technology education for students. Our keynote speaker has formidable academic preparation. He is a holder of the following degrees: Bachelor of Science in Biology, Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, Master of Science in Biology and Biomedicine, Virginia State University, Master of Arts in Developmental Psychology, Regis University in Colorado, and his PhD in Bioethics, Sustainability, and Public Health, American University of Sovereign Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker, Dr. Layne Hartsell.
Check, check. Can you hear me back in the back there? That's the first part. Okay, I see it comes up. In the far back. That's good. It's first of all, thank you for the walk down memory lane. I have not seen these pictures in a long time, and it brings back a lot of memories, and it also endears me to you. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak. I want to ask quickly, first, how many scientists are in the room? Can I just see a quick show of hands if you're trained in science? And how about education? Okay, education, literature? Okay, so, yeah, this is what I had expected, that there would be quite a broad field, a number of areas, and I would have to prepare for this to pull off such a lecture. Well, first I want to thank Doctors Vidya Yangyam Rasidon Bernate of APCOR, Dr. Guanamudra Teresita Atienza, my new friend. She's the president of Quezon City University, and other presidents and deans, fellow researchers, faculty, ladies and gentlemen, and others that are present. I want to first give the contours of what we call civilization, and since I was asked to speak about sustainability, then you'll hear most of my talk is about a kind of ecology. In fact, it would be called ecological philosophy. The contours that I'm talking about can only be contours because we can't actually see what civilization is, and I'm going to describe that in a moment. The possible avenues towards a sustainable society I'll cover in the second part of the talk about what directions research can go. So first of all, I want to give a reorientation and then possible suggestions for what an academic program might look like, but an academic program that also involves public. The first part would be about, of course, mountains and cities and sustainability. So practically concerning ecology and sustainability, if, say, for example, axes and chainsaws and machines are allowed into the mountains and the forest only in appropriate seasons, then there would be more timber than we could use, as logic would go. But if not, then the beauty of the mountain and loss of biodiversity, such as animals and plants and that which we gain sustenance from, would be lost. But then cattle and sheep come along and graze upon them, and later the machines come. Seeing this barrenness, people suppose that the mountain was never wooded. But how could this be? How could this be the nature of the mountain? And then concerning cities, surely it's obvious enough if one looks at the world today that it's becoming better populated. There are cities, much more than ancient. All places are now accessible, and all are well known. They're open to commerce. Cultivated fields have subdued forests, and there are large cities everywhere. However, our numbers are burdensome to the world, which can hardly supply us from the natural elements, and the complaints are bitter in all mouths. While nature fails according to what we need for her usual sustenance. For any of you that are in literature, you'll recognize some curious things about my observations this morning. Well, first of all, for the scientists, the previous could be a paraphrase from public statements of climate scientists, wildlife biologists, oceanographers. But the first observation I made about the mountains comes from the Chinese philosopher Mencius. I was quoting Mencius 2,400 years ago about the destruction of the mountains. That was Ox Mountain that I was speaking of. The second quote comes from Father Tertullian. Father Tertullian was the father of Christianity in the West, writing 1,800 years ago. Not my words, but theirs. Both Mencius and Father Tertullian were observing the scale-up of the core matter of what we call the urban revolution, or the Neolithic revolution, or what today we just call civilization. This also brings to mind that in Southeast Asia, there is the tradition of the forest monks, which especially the Thai professors here won't know much about. In fact, the only monk to ever been in prison was a forest monk, protecting the trees. This goes back quite a bit further than Father Tertullian and Mencius to a time when we have a myth called Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a mythological king from 5,000 years ago, more or less, at a place called Uruk, U-R-U-K, that's located somewhere there. Well, we can see the ziggurats, right? So the ziggurat is like a pyramid type structure. It's there just above the Gulf, but of course the Gulf was much further up at the time, and a lot of that was submerged at the time is now revealed. Or is covered with water, sorry. The myth goes that Gilgamesh went to the forest, killed the forest guardian. Enkidu, his sidekick, chose the best cedars of the forest. They cut down the forest and took the cedars back to the city 5,000 years ago. If there are any ancient forests left in the Levant there being, the wars are happening right now today. If there are any cedars left there today, ancient cedars, it's on the flag of Lebanon. There are no more ancient forests. The area from there down was a savanna. In fact, an oak savanna. Today it's a sea of sand, all the way down to Saudi Arabia. Northern Africa, which was the granary of Carthage and Rome, is now desert. Forests precede us, and deserts dart our path, dart our heels. Operationally, mentally, and physically, the same is still with us. There shouldn't be anything left on the ground. We need everything that's out there. We cut down the forest and we take everything. We log to infinity. Because it's out there, we need it all now. That's a near direct quote from CEO Merlot from Louisiana Pacific Timber Company in the United States a few decades ago. I'm quoting him directly. If we look around in most any place we go today, we can only imagine. So for example, try to imagine 3 to 4 meters of topsoil that would be where you're located that's gone. Look around, 3 to 4 times larger, even 10 times larger trees, denser forests, gone. The ancient forests aren't with us, very few. The ideas of orientation against nature from the intellectual lineage of the urban revolution are all through history. It's not anything new. Climate change is making it out there in the public. People know about it, but there's a long history to this. What I'm talking about here is a technosphere or a multiplex of built up steel, metals, petroleum products, and so on, all centered in piles of sand and steel and petroleum that make a city. So when you look at a city, it's a pile of sand and steel and petroleum. And much of the sand comes from Southeast Asia and from Australia and has to go on ships over to, say, build the great cities, not in the United States, but the Middle East, for example. Had we stopped at the medieval city, so if you think about medieval times, the cities were better designed. People were starting to get out into nature more. For example, Dante was hiking out in the forest and mountains in central Italy. There was a more workable ecology, and the charter of the forest was enforced. Civilization in the Anthropocene is not something like that. Today we live in what we call, what we tend to think is called the Anthropocene, but we have to wait for the geologists to decide on exactly what that means. Is being caused by this interaction between humans and this technosphere that I described against the natural environment. It's this understanding from which I speak today about a reorientation to what I call bioregionalism. The main way that we kind of delineated the Anthropocene, which moving from the Holocene the last 12,000 years into a new geological era, is because of the nuclear weapons that were used all over the globe about 70 years ago. And you can't see it, but the radiation fallout is in the atmosphere and it's in the sediments, and it's those sediments that we're using to measure time, geological time. So that's why we call it a new era, because the entire irradiated stratigraphic data is there. Okay, so the Holocene is supposed to be past, and we're into a new era, one where human systems, the technosphere, is actually not only affecting the atmosphere, but creating such change that it's effective on us. Now remember, billions of years ago, archaebacteria and so forth in the oceans created this poison that went into the atmosphere called oxygen, and then from there on, we're told that the plants, animals, and so forth come along. There were times when the deforestation was affecting the climate, but the time that we're in right now is unique. And climate scientist Will Stephan and the group around him called it the Great Acceleration. So most of my focus is on the last 70 years, and which time most of us have lived through, or a lot of us have lived through, or at least some of you half of it, if you're in your 20s or 30s. I'm in your 60s, so I have to, I've seen a lot of it as an adult. The archaeologist David Wingrove says, that he's at University College London, says that civilization first entered European languages during the late 18th century in an age of empire and revolution. So its genesis in the philosophical writings of the European Enlightenment is elusive, but we have some comments. So civilization has been in practice, but it's not so much talked about. But if you look at civil, civitas, or polis, that means the city. The third volume of Nicholas Antoine Hollander's Antiquity Revealed by Its Customs talks about civilization, but the historian Lucien Febvre once warned that to seek the origins of civilization, as I do today, is to embark upon a series of dangerous excavations, considering that archaeologists and anthropologists whose disciplines were first called into being as a means of establishing what civilizations are and how they first developed, are basically to study urbanized man. It's centric. In other words, to add on another subclause, it's setting up a system for historical circular reasoning of which scientific study is framed within the civilization model. I'll go on to make the point. The foundation of civilization or logic, characteristics and tendencies, all coalesce into a core substance of large-scale human settlements as urban centers based on mining the earth. So you have to mine the soils, you have to mine minerals, you have to quarry to build a city. All seen in the myth of Gilgamesh. Characteristics such as mining, agriculture, farming, writing, codification of laws, beyond accounting and record keeping, monumental agriculture or architecture, and advances in science and technology, of a particular kind of techniques, all fit into this constellation that we call civilization. At the core of civilization is urbanization, which is a process towards an urban center or a city, or what Schilde, the famous anthropologist, archaeologist, is a single built-up area, quoting him, with agglomerations of human settlements, and we're quoting recent researchers, they are socio-spatial constructs and their relationship to change in the physical and functional aspects of urban form occur that not only go beyond the carrying capacity, so biological carrying capacity, but beyond the process of the land base, including soils, minerals, rocks, rivers, and so forth. No longer are rivers married to mountains. Such a process is one of catastrophic extraction, what I describe as a particular kind of culture, of course, and there are various ways that culture is expressed. You want to call it capitalism today, that's one form. Therefore, civilization is a spatio-cultural system based on catastrophic extraction, in which the removal of organic and physical dimensions of a land base identify as expansion through the destruction of nature. Mining, quarrying, logging, and agriculture. Those are foundations. The conditions today, however, I'll go further, so I should say add on, is undeniable. And a number of the problems or conditions are converging concerning the biosphere and geosphere. So for some of the lay people, the biosphere is this really thin layer of biological life that basically that's us and most all beings, except for maybe the deep ocean and so forth, volcanoes. But most all life on the surface of the earth is a very, very tiny layer. Then the geosphere is these big mechanical motion type things, the oceans, the atmosphere, the land masses. All of that the scientists are studying, such as the NOAA in Boulder, Colorado, the geographic and oceanographic and atmospheric scientists. The point is, and I'm not talking about the weather, right? I wanted to make a comment just about social media. The point here is not about the weather. It's often confused by main influencers of young people on the internet and also by politicians, particularly in powerful countries like the one I come from. The weather and the atmosphere are not the same thing. I'm not just making a small comment here. I'm talking about people with millions and tens of millions of dollars. Jordan Peterson, for example, confusing the weather with the atmosphere. It's an abomination because he goes on to tell young people that climate change is occurring. That's irresponsible. When the scientists, particularly the physicists, the geologists, biologists, and so on, say we have a problem concerning human ecology, we ought to give attention. In June of 1988, climate scientist James Hansen, of course, addressed the U.S. Congress, quite late in my view, but certainly he happened. And today, Hansen is still at work with others. For example, a group of researchers around climate scientist Will Stephan that I mentioned earlier. Will just passed away recently during the pandemic. But the great acceleration is that time that I'm speaking of, and that's his term. This post-war massive scale-up of everything, and the idea of a planet on which all species can live has been fading, and it is this situation that led Stephan to ask his major question in one of his major speeches: where on earth are we going? I'm going to try to answer that. Eco-philosopher Derek Jensen, great literary philosopher, one of my teachers who worked at NOAA in Boulder some decades ago, he formed an entire work on ecological philosophy to look at civilization. He says that civilization will take down the biosphere if we do not salvage as much of wild nature as we can. A planetary ecological society will have to decouple the chain of extraction, moving from the hinterland into the cities and so forth. Of course, what I'm using today comes from those mines and refineries and so forth. We have to realize that this is all pervasive. Putting it together, since the Second World War, this new epoch that has emerged, the Anthropocene, is based on industrial civilization, including the nuclear technology fallout, and it's during this time that globalization of technological and economic system that's been threatening the planetary and geophysical and biological system on which all species depend for life. Incidentally, one of the great writers on globalization, someone that you know, you've seen his books everywhere, sold millions, went so far to say directly and favorably that this is going to be imposed by U.S. soldiers going from house to house in Iraq to impose the system, and using a sexual slur related to weapons, to guns, that I would not repeat here for you. The ideas are there in his books, all bestsellers. You can go to the bookstore and get them. He was speaking about the Middle East, he's at the New York Times. He was speaking about the Middle East and Iraq, but he's still writing and lecturing today and celebrating. We need not wonder why many countries prefer doing business with Asia, which has been much more equitable with policies for trading culture and innovation as the world center of culture shifts back to its original location. That's China, India, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. Because it was violently dislodged due to the age of European aggression. Mr. Friedman should take note of history. In this great acceleration, which Stephan talked about, it is also imperative that we consider population, where in the last 70 years, another massive event of the Anthropocene has occurred. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Planetary migration. I'm not talking about just from, say, Guatemala to Texas. I'm talking about a planetary migration is occurring, resulting in most of the world's population going to live in city regions. Now megapolis is just a massive city running along. With 68% of the world's population expected to be urban by 2050. That's 15 years. Some examples give the magnitude. The first is Latin America. The biggest change has been in Latin America and the Caribbean over the last 70 years, with 81.2% of the population living in urban areas, up 41.3% since 1950. Such data can be seen in physical reality in civilization of the Pearl River Delta, which had an aggregate of 42 million residents by 2010. So I'm a bit dated on my data here. If considered as a single urban area, these cities, the cities there in the Pearl River Delta, will be the world's largest city both in area and population, yielding some new kind of thing for which megapolis doesn't quite fit, and we need more language maybe from the poets to provide us so that we can understand what this phenomenon is. Today, there's a hemispheric plan underway to extend the New Silk Road through the Belt and Road Initiative across Asia, Southeast Asia, Eurasia, MENA, Middle East, and North Africa, and so forth. And now there's a spreading shooting war in Eurasia. These are the conditions that we're looking at today. I mean, it's almost as if I'm reading a sci-fi novel to you right now. I wrote this myself, right? The most important example is hyper-urbanization in Nigeria. Does anyone think about Nigeria? Well, it may be a good idea. Nowhere is this breakneck pace development happening faster than in this 600-mile stretch between Abidjan and Lagos. We're talking, I don't know, maybe 100 million people eventually in this area. Can you imagine? Right now in this room we have maybe a few hundred. In Bangsan Beach, maybe there's 30,000 people. Can you imagine 100 million people on a land base? The third, Bangkok, we don't know how many people live there, like Mexico City, but it's probably 20 million or so. Mexico City is maybe 30 million. So you can imagine just the levels of impact. The third industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution are put forth to save us. We are told that we will own nothing and be happy. The culmination of the industrial, quoting them by the way, culmination of the industrial age with the industrial civilization is spoken of in this new emergence of these different revolutions. For the market society of quantified human interaction, that means maybe we'll have cryptocurrencies, and if we want to interact with someone, you have to give me, I charge you for some cryptocurrency, you scan a QR code, and then you can talk to me or something. This is what I mean by the extreme version of money, where money is basically quantified human interaction. Any other is a gift, right? So we're making a distinction between money and gifts. Quantified human interaction and the convergence of technologies, such as biotechnology, information systems, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and robotics, like Dr. Teresita and I were talking about earlier. I think we will have to have, if my arithmetic is right, going back to third grade, we'll have to have the third industrial revolution before we have the fourth industrial revolution. But of course, that's if we go with arithmetic. If we go with height, these societal level structures are hyped up technical innovations with planetary effects and are based on the extraordinary power and proliferation of modern technology and engineering within a specific kind of techniques that they control. Discovery, invention, and innovation are conceived of, developed, and directed into a mode of application of a civilizational techniques and culture. This techniques of global civilization. I'm using techniques and technology differently. Technology is applied knowledge. You can have pure applied knowledge just because you have a kind of applied knowledge that you don't. It's not actually applied, but it's there. It's knowledge. This is a pure kind of aspect, and many times it's confused with techniques. Techniques is the manner in which we apply technology. So technology is actually neutral in this sense. Techniques is what we're talking about. But anyway, this global civilized phenomenon that I'm talking about has affected most all categories of species. For any of the biologists here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's perhaps 10,000 species going extinct per month beyond the background extinction rates. And it's been noted by virtually all sectors of areas of human society and knowledge, creating the global physical multiplex of that technological infrastructure that I talked about. The only problem is that the United Nations Environmental Program, these people, produced an emissions gap report in 2020, and they stated the scenario is currently not credible. Of course, they're speaking of the actual scenario of a 1.5 degrees cap on the temperature, rising temperature, but they say even 1.8 is not possible. We need system-wide transformation, they say. The report tells us how to go about such a transformation. The SDGs, for example. It looks in depth the changes needed in electrical supply, industry, transport, buildings, and food systems. So to answer Will Steffen's pragmatic rhetorical question of where on earth are we going, and to respond to my teacher Derek Jensen's ideas and the imperative of the UN Environmental Program for this system-wide transformation, I think it important to orient or reorient to what I call bioregionalism that would produce ecological societies. This is not just the musings of a hermit living in the forest in Thailand. This is coming directly from Chinese state policy. They call it eco-civilization, much bigger idea. But anyway, that's what I'm talking about. Of course, I'm naturally not going to go along with the state policy unless it's a decent policy, but to develop ideas and practices and funding that could suffice to begin a larger discussion, which basically would be the charge to you all as researchers and thinkers to get this discussion going so that we can then direct funding societally into those research labs and into the centers that can develop the technologies that are needed. I call it transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, however you want to do it, but this has got to be developed further. And I think that crucially, the university system has to be in this. Fundamentally, it's important to correctly identify the major contributing factors by relying on the scientists and particularly assessing the essential role of urbanization and the large processes such as emissions from fossil fuels, agriculture and farming, livestock, deforestation, application of chemicals in nature, and artifacts. The evaluation of urbanization is important because we can actually take stock of the thermodynamics of a city, not in the sense of its physical, we know its physical structure, but through its actual process and daily functioning and its build-up over time. This process of industrialized urbanization has created an anthropogenic mass, so a mass created by humans, of 1,154 gigatons in the last century, in 100 years. That's how much anthropogenic mass artifact that was created, which is 34 gigatons more than the entire biomass of the Earth, where humans are more or less 0.01% of biomass. One example is the period between 2011 and 2013, so 3 or 4 years. China used 140% of the cement that the United States required in the entire 20th century to build the United States. China used it in 4 years. China's infrastructure was built between 2000 and 2015. So, I mean, if you can try to fathom how awesomely powerful this particular system is. For human use of energy, expenditure in the Anthropocene, 70 years, right, has been 22 zetajoules and exceeds the entire energy used across the prior 11,700 years of the Holocene, which was 14.6 zetajoules. In total, 60% of all human-produced energy has been consumed in the last 70 years. A joule, for example, for scientists, allow me some basic science, basic physics. A joule is a kilogram per meter squared, or 4,000 joules is 1 kilocalorie. That to give you an idea of what a joule is. Further, human-mediated mineral species and synthetic mineral-like compounds now exceed 180,000 to 190,000 different kinds of mineral species, and most species have been created since 1950. Earth geological processes over the last 4.5 billion years only created 5,300 natural occurring mineral species, including those mediated by biological processes. So we'll talk about the economy, demographic figures. They demonstrate, let's take for example, investment emissions. Let's say I am a billionaire, let's say, or I have a lot of money, a few hundred million, whatever, and I have investments in this particular structure, which I do. Analysis of the investments of the 125 of the world's richest billionaires shows that on average they are emitting 3 million tons a year of emissions, more than 1 million times the average for someone in the bottom 90% of humanity. Whenever we talk about we are creating climate change, they're lying. The responsibility for climate change is on the rich countries where I come from and the people there. People in villages are have very little responsibility for this. It's true that, say, for example, recycling has increased and some recycling is near 100%. Okay, that's fine, good. At the same time, what is not usually discussed is that energy demand, mining, and extraction are all going up dramatically with historic highs, aluminum and bauxite mining, for example. Now, there were 2 times in the last couple of decades, so in this millennium, where there was a decrease in extraction. One was the Great Recession, when the United States financiers destroyed the economy, only to be saved with $1 trillion within about 4 hours that was given to President Bush, who didn't know what was going on. That went to about, I don't know how many trillions of dollars, maybe $3 trillion followed that, maybe $10 trillion followed that, again into the pandemic with another $7 trillion in the pandemic. The entire system is on life support with the printing of money going on. These are the conditions that we live in. We can expect almost horrific, irreversible outcomes since there's no significant risk deterrent. Politics is virtually paralyzed. The principle of precaution is not even a consideration in economic decision making, where cost-benefit prevails. We might wonder about the terms value and benefit. The leveraging of ecological risk on top of centuries of risk due to metaphysical commitment to the current techniques and profit-driven attitude, I should add, into the use of powerful technologies is working. I'm not making speculations here. I'm talking about actual data right now. There's an epistemic crisis and so forth and so on, as you know, if you look at the internet and how we are trying to understand what's going on. And that I come to as a failure, of course, of the education system, not of any particular person in this room, I don't mean, but the fact of somehow the critical faculties that we all have need to be brought out such that people know how to even select information. They have to have enough knowledge to go along with that. For example, if you talk about, say, the linguistic ability or the inferential ability, inferential ability is an intuitive process. So if I, for example, give a syllogism, everyone will understand the syllogism, right? The syllogism isn't coming from the outside. We make the connections because of the cognitive ability, okay? So what I'm saying is, everybody has the ability to understand that, but this ability of critical reasoning has to be brought out. The second part is they have to have knowledge to put into the arguments to even be able to discuss and quote. In my country, it's on the verge of a civil war. This has broken down, which is very serious. It looks like they're not going to be able to actually get to the optimism, which is, I'm describing a system that I don't particularly agree with, live in it, but the optimistic aspect where I think that there is a way out that involves clean technology and all that, I may have to save for another lecture. So why don't I just end here with having given a picture, hopefully as accurate as possible, of what the world looks like at the moment, but it's hard to disown it because it's in us and around us, but to point out that there are other ways that the system can be directed, even if we continue with civilization, which I think we will. I mean, I don't think civilization is going to go tomorrow, but there are different ways that we can go that we have a responsibility, all of us, especially if you have a PhD, when you start doctor of philosophy, that's the center of civilization, right? We need to get to work and work on this discussion that then can articulate what is necessary to bring the funding into what we need to do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hartsell. Once again, let us give him a round of applause, please. Sorry.
Are there any questions, or do we move on?
Questions? Okay, so, we will not be opening
Do you want me to answer questions, or do we do something later?
since it's a keynote address, will not be opening the floor for questions and answers.
During the break.
Yeah, the questions will be entertained during the break. So at this point, Dr. Hartsell would like to request you to please remain on stage as we call on the BUU and APLOR officials, Dr. Witawan Jangyam, Dr. Rasidon Bernarte, and Dr. Ian Budra to award the plaque of appreciation. Let me read the citation. Asia Pacific Consortium of Researchers and Educators Incorporated and Burapa University, in collaboration with its esteemed academic partners, awards this plaque of recognition to Dr. Layne Hartsell, Research Professor, Center for Ethics and Science and Technology, Department of Philosophy, Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand, Research Fellow, the Asia Institute Convergence and 3E Program, Seoul, South Korea, for having shared his pioneering and transformative ideas as keynote speaker during the Asian Graduate Studies Summit 2024 with the theme Integrative Solutions for the Future of Asia, Catalyzing Graduate Research for Sustainable Development, held on April 5th, 2024 at Sen Heritage Hotel, Chonburi, Thailand. A round of applause for Dr. Layne Hartsell.